Hey everybody, Bob Chick back with another edition of The Voice of Bodybuilding, brought to you by Redcon One and powered by Panada Sport. Updates on Panada coming soon, folks. I've been keeping you up to date on what's going on. 10 pieces of brand new Panada equipment on their way here to Georgia. We'll have an update at the end of this week. So, where am I off to this week? Well, where else but Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. What goes on there, you ask? Everybody knows what goes on there. The Pittsburgh Pro, of course. Not only a big-time show, not only an Olympia qualifying event, but 6 or 7 of the top athletes in the world will be making their way. It's a great preview. This is where Derek Lunsford made his big new appearance last year, and we all saw how that turned out. So all eyes will be on Pittsburgh, but all eyes were on Pittsburgh way back in the day, 1971. That's where we're going back to. What happened in 71? The Mr. Pittsburgh was being put on. And who won it? Our very own Jim Manion, Mr. Pittsburgh, 1971. That would be 20 years before the appointed date that we're going to be talking about in just a few moments. But just to further on that, since a lot of people don't know the history of our very own president, Mr. Jim Manion, not only was he Mr. Pittsburgh in 71, but in 1974, he would compete in his last show, the Southeast USA. And he didn't win. He lost a show, but he lost it to a man named Robbie Robinson. How about the president himself took a runner-up to Robbie Robinson, and then he would go on to greater things, the reason that we're all here today in the NPC and the IFBB Pro League. But that was in 71, folks. We're going to flip forward in time to 1991. Now, there are few things that anybody in the bodybuilding world can ever agree on. All right, almost nothing. I don't care what show you bring up, what Olympia you bring up. Somebody else has somebody else winning. This guy got screwed. This guy should have won. No way that guy should have won. But there's only one thing I've ever found in this sport that's pretty much universally agreed on and accepted. And that is that the 1991 Nationals was the greatest Nationals of all time. Very hard to dispute, but I says, you know what? I'm going to tackle this. So I'm going to do a show comparing the 1991 Nationals to another Nationals. And I thought to myself, you know what? It'd be pretty cool if I compare 91 to modern day. So I looked at the calendar and I says, you know what? Why don't we just do it from just the other year, 1991 to 2021. I thought they'd be kind of cool. Except I ran into a problem, which is with all due respect to the people that won or placed in the Nationals in 2021, it wasn't really comparable. I mean, it's not even close, to be honest with you guys. So I started going back, and I said, all right, let me go to 2011. Well, again, decent, not bad, but certainly no match for 91. Then I went to 2001. Still nothing. So I says, you know what? And then a light bulb went off over my head, and I thought, you know what? I'm not going to compare the 91 Nationals to another Nationals. I'm just going to pick another show totally with some honest, real good competition. And everybody's always clamoring for the old days. They said the old days were so much better than what we got today. So I says, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to compare the 1991 Nationals to the Olympia. Now, I'm not comparing it to the 91 Olympia. I'm going to compare it to last year's Olympia. So this is going to be real fun. And we're going to go mano a mano, whatever that means. All right? We're going to compare these guys straight up. Now, let me just set the field before everybody goes crazy on me, okay? We know how some of you guys can be out there. All right, a few caveats, okay? It was very, very difficult to even find images of the 91 Nationals. I'm still on the hunt because somebody out there has video, whether it's the Muscle Video Journal guys. If you guys are watching out there, Carl, if you're still kicking around, we could certainly use some help finding some footage of the 91 Nationals and pictures. So difficult to find. And the ones you can find are not very crisp. Now, folks, it's 1991. We don't have no 4 and 5K type stuff, okay? None of this great, camera equipment like we have today. So, in the interest of transparency, and I'm going to show you the difference on these things, but all we're going to do is we're going to enhance the photos slightly. When I say enhance, we're just sharpening them, okay? The contrast, because they're so fuzzy that it would be unfair even to try to get a heads-up competition between now and then, okay? These aren't photoshopped. They're not increased. We did our best to actually size them correctly where the guys are about the same proportion of height, whether they're shorter or taller, okay? But let me just put that disclaimer out there right now so we're all on the same page, okay? Being as fair as we can possibly be and comparing the 1991 amateurs, okay, the top 5 national guys to the top 5 Olympia guys, courtesy of last year. All right, so I got my computer here ready to go, and we've got our top 5. It should go top 6 because in 6th place was yours truly. How about that? 6th place, still disputed, still pissed off about that. I don't know what was going on there. I clearly deserved higher, but that would put me against our 6th place finisher at last year's Olympia. That would be Samson. Oh, boy. So, all right, why don't we just go with the top 5? We'll work on that one another day since we don't have enough images of me. Here's one right here you guys can see. This is a lineup shot, side chest pose. You can see me right there next to a guy named Ronnie Coleman and Matt Mendenhall. But, all right, we're going to save that one for a heads up another day. But, so here's what we're going to do, everybody. We're going to go heads up, like I said, mano a mano, man for man, placing for placing. And let's see what you, the fans, decide. Were the 90s that great? Could this lineup have beaten the lineup at this last year's Olympia? All right, in 5th place, we have the late and departed Matt Mendenhall. God bless you, Matt. Great bodybuilder, some of the best genetics of all time. A man that Lee Haney himself said had the best genetics he's ever seen. Goes up against our 5th place finisher. That'd be Big Ramy. So let's go to the pictures. So what are we looking at? Back double bicep shot. Okay, you've got Big Ramy clearly on the left. You've got Matt Mendenhall on the right. Now, what are we looking at here? Well, you're looking at, first thing that comes to mind is when you look at this photo, you see where the posing has changed slightly. What I'm talking about there is, especially in the legs, guys back then didn't really kick their thighs out to show the sweep and all that. It was very much just kind of a straight on shot from the bottom. Lee Haney was very famous for doing that in his back double bi shots, but you can see this is a formidable comparison right here. Matt Mendenhall had some great genetics. You can see he's holding a little bit in the lower back there. This is why he only placed 5th at the Nationals, despite having some great genetics. He was a little off in the conditioning department. That was Matt's Achilles heel, unfortunately, and kept him out of the pros. But as you can see from this back double bi, he's holding his own pretty good against Big Ramy. Now, Matt was probably, well, I'll tell you right now, he was about 5'11", 5'10", 5'11", and he probably went in the 230-something range, maybe even 240. He was a big boy for back then. Ramy has some considerable size on Matt, but as you can see, now again, we wore trunks to kind of cover up your ass back then. We didn't really accentuate or show the glutes, so clearly you're not going to see too much detail there. You can see Matt is clearly in condition, but from this back double bi, you can see we got ourselves a competition here, and we're going to move on to the next pose. That is a back lat spread. Now, a couple of things that come to mind. Again, you're not going to see any glute development or even showing the glutes. We wore trunks to cover it up. That's just the way it was back then. You can see the rear delts are much bigger on Big Ramy. You can see also, though, that Matt is holding his own when it comes to a big lat spread. Lots of muscle. He rounds his back a little bit more than Ramy, whether we caught that in mid or not. Again, we're just dealing with the photos that we can get our hands on, everybody. So bear with me. I'm going to do the best I can while we assess our gentlemen here, but you can see this is a good shot for Ramy and for Matt. All right, now we got a front shot here. We got Matt doing a single bi, and you got Big Ramy doing a double bi. This is very comparable right here. Now, you're going to see a few things. Number one, Matt Mendenhall has probably some of the best shape, proportion, symmetry that ever came around. His conditioning, again, was always his down point. Sometimes he hit it, sometimes he didn't. But you can see from this photo, he actually has better shape and proportion than Big Ramy does. Who wins the pose? Well, that's up to debate. That's what we're here for. But you can see the thighs have much more cuts. Now, again, this photo has been sharpened, okay? That's it, folks. This is no Photoshop, no trickery here, no voodoo. Just sharpened, okay, to try to at least make it comparable because these photos are so fuzzy. And actually, if you can put up that photo of Matt in this same pose that's not enhanced. And you can see right here. So this is not enhanced. All right. And now we can show the enhanced one again. We'll call it enhanced, sharpened, whatever term you want to use. Now you can see that the photo is pretty much the same. It just sharpens it up enough that we can get it, a close comparison between these two guys. But I got to give this shot to Matt right here. I mean, this is an excellent pose for Matt Mendenhall You can see why his genetics were considered some of the best ever. It's not a bad shot for Ramy, but the thighs, again, a little bit too big for the rest of the legs. Matt had beautiful calves, by the way. Some of the best calves I've ever seen, bet them natural or not. But when I say natural, I mean you either got good calves or you don't. Calves are very genetic when it comes to bodybuilders. You can train until the cows come home, no pun intended. But you either kind of have calves or you don't, I've noticed. All right, in our last photo, we have a most muscular. Now, both gentlemen, again, Ramy's not in the pose exactly because you can see from this pose he's blowing out. So I suspect he'd probably have some more lines around his chest, but you can see the thighs look very good in that pose. He's got very wide shoulders. Nobody's wider than Big Ramy. That's why he has 2 Olympians to his credit. And you can see Matt with the hands on hips. This was a good pose for Matt. Again, he's crunching down just a little bit too much. A little bit more upright would have showed this to a better shot. Now, this was not Matt's best look, okay? His best look was actually years before. This was his last show before he retired. His best years literally were from 82 to 87. Okay, this is 91. And Matt had some of the worst luck. I've alluded to this before, but just listen to this list. Let me just take 20 seconds here on this one, okay? He loses in succession to Lee Haney in 82. 1983, Bob Paris, followed by Rory, Mike Christian, and Jeff Williams, another top name for back then. Okay, 84, he loses to Mike Christian. 85, actually won the USA's in the heavyweights, but that was not a pro qualifier back then. You had to win the overall, and that was won by our good friend Dave Hawk from Pittsburgh. All right, hats off to Dave. Big shout out to him. 86, he loses to Stridham. 87, a show that I made my debut at. Actually, we competed against each other. He was only an 11th place finisher, Phil Hill winning that one. And I would place top 5 and 5th place in my first show there. So you could see Matt, just in addition to never quite nailing it, he had some of the worst luck ever in terms of who he was competing against. I mean, that is that's a who's who of bodybuilding, and he never would get his pro card. But all right, so you've seen our comparisons. We don't have every single mandatory pose, unfortunately. Again, very difficult to find pictures or video even of the 91 Nationals. Maybe in a future episode we can hunt some down. So the big $1 million question: who wins, Big Ramy versus Matt Mendenhall? Even though I'm obviously nostalgic and Matt was a great bodybuilder, I got to give the nod to Ramy on this one because this was not Matt's best finish. I think overall, if you compare these two, Matt's best finish, which is probably in the mid-80s to Ramy, I don't think that's even a question. Matt beats him all day long. But we're going straight up, heads up, 91 Nationals versus Olympia. I got to give the nod to Big Ramy on this one. All right. So, moving on. In 4th place, we have Ronnie Coleman versus Brandon Curry. This is going to be a good one. Now, good for a couple reasons. Number one, this is not the Ronnie Coleman that you guys are used to seeing, and you're going to see that from this first photo we're going to put up of the front abdominal shot, okay? Now, this is a very lean, alleged natural Ronnie Coleman back then in 1991. Now, you can see shades of what was to come. You can see he's got some big old thighs because he was a power lifter. Upper body, not quite exactly what you remember when he became the Big Nasty and won a whole bunch of Olympias. But this is Brandon Curry versus Ronnie Coleman. Shot number 1, abdominals. Now, Brandon, former Mr. Olympia winner, up against Ronnie Coleman. Again, both finished 4th place. What are we looking at here? Well, you can see this is not Brandon's best conditioning, which is why he places 4th and didn't contend for another title. And Coleman, this was his, I believe it might have been his national debut or close to it. And he's in some very good conditioning. Now the front abdominal shot, it's a difficult one to assess because you can never really tell whether somebody's in the shot. You can see that Brandon's hitting the shot. I've seen his abs look a little sharper, so I'm going to guess he's not quite there all the way in terms of posing, but you can see he's a little smooth here. That's going to hurt him against Ronnie, even though Ronnie's not huge here. You can see his abs are very deeply etched, and I think he's beaten Brandon heads up in this pose right here. Moving on to the next pose that we have. Now, this is a strong point for both our bodybuilders. Brandon Curry is very formidable from behind. under normal circumstances. You can see here, again, holding a little bit of water, especially in that lower back. He's got that huge shoulder to waist ratio, which is why he's one of the champs and why he's a former Olympia winner. Ronnie, we couldn't find a standing back double by, but we have this pose here, which is clearly illustrating. This was one of Ronnie's best poses back in the day before he became, again, the modern Ronnie. Now, by pure shape and such, I'm going to give this to Brandon. Ronnie's clearly in better condition, but he's lacking that muscle thickness that we would come to know him with. But Brandon certainly, I mean, he's put together, man. I mean, you can see why he's a former Mr. Olympia. Got all the tools, got beautiful shape, beautiful proportions, not missing nothing. Missing a little bit of conditioning here, but again, that's why he only took 4th place. All right, this is a great matchup pose right here. Now, this is Ronnie Coleman hitting his hands on hips, and Brandon hitting his clasping, sorry about that, folks, front muscular shot. Great pose for both guys. Now, I got to get Ronnie on this one. Look at the striations in the shoulders, the pecs. Look at those biceps are even split. And his legs, although he's not flexing it, you can see from the other pose, he's got lines in there. Got lines all the way up. He's in much better conditioning than Brandon is here, even though Brandon's a little bit rounder here than Ronnie was in 91. I got to give this pose square up to Ronnie Coleman because he's ripped up and he's in shape. All right. Next pose, front lat spread. Again, interesting pose here. Brandon's, unfortunately, he's soft here, and again, which reflected in his placings, but it really throws everything off because he's so much sharper than that normally that you can see this really hurts him in this pose right here. And Ronnie Coleman was very wide. Again, you can see the shoulders. You can see the beginnings of what would be supersized down the road and why Ronnie would go on to win 8 Olympias. So I'm going to give the check mark again to Ronnie. And you can see by this pose, I mean, yes, he's a little bit light in the legs, of course. Legs needed to come up, but look at the lines in the chest. Look at the shoulder cap and the arms. You can see he's in much better conditioning, and he's actually got a smaller waist than Brandon does here. So this is a great pose for Ronnie. Again, because he's a little bit sharper, I know not everything's up to sharpness and being ripped and all that stuff, but all things considered, if these two guys are standing next to each other, got to give a strong consideration to Ronnie Coleman here, just because Brandon's not consistent here and he's not bringing the full conditioning. So, conclusion, I'm going to give this round here to Ronnie Coleman, even though he was an amateur here and would go on to win the World Championships later that year and turn pro. Brandon simply not enough conditioning here to beat the Big Nasty. All right, so that's 4th place, and the nod goes to Ronnie. All right, folks, we are into our top 3. 3rd place, heads up, here we go. Paul DeMayo versus Nick Walker. This is a great, great matchup. First pose, most muscular, one of Nick's strong points. This was also a good pose for Paul DeMayo. He liked that clasping, most muscular shot from the front. Nick likes that hands on hips photo, and he also does a front clasping pose. Most musculars are great shots for guys that are compact and have a lot of muscle. You can see from this lineup right here, Paul could have used a little bit of width. Nick is a lot wider than Paul. These are great shots for both guys. Got to give the edge to Nick Walker here. He's in as good, if not better, condition. Paul was in great condition, which is why he ended up top 3 in this competition at the Nationals heavy. And he wasn't small. This is the heavyweights. Now, folks, remember, there's no super heavyweights back then, okay? There's just a heavyweight. This is it. So whether you were 200-something pounds or 300 pounds, we were all in the same class. All right, moving on. Front double bicep. I got to give this one to Paul DeMayo. This is not a great shot for Nick. He's a little stumpy, so to say. You know, we've been over that 100 times. But look at the biceps on Paul. Look at the small waist and the thighs. You can see why they call them Quadzilla. He was lacking nothing when it comes to leg development. Second only probably all time to Tom Platz himself. But this is an interesting comparison right here. You can see Paul a little bit more dynamic. I actually wouldn't mind seeing Nick do a pose similar to this where he kind of bends on the one leg, shows a little bit of action into it, takes a little bit away from the fact that he's long-waisted and short-legged. Paul showing similar signs there, but it wasn't as transparent as what you're seeing here. Another good matchup here. Got to give the edge to Paul DeMayo on this one. Now, here's a great heads-up comparison. This is a tough one. Side chest, great shot for both guys. Again, they didn't do a lot of the tricks back then. There was no pushing the knee into the other leg to kind of get that separation out into the leg. You can see Paul is just hitting the shot from the side. But, man, look at the striations in his chest. Great separation in the shoulder. So does Nick. This is probably one of Nick's better shots. So who wins this one? I almost got to call this one a tie. I mean, this is very, very close. You can see that Nick's arms are a little bit bigger than Paul's. Paul wasn't really lacking in the arm department. His legs were so much bigger than his upper body. It took him years to bring his upper body to match, but he finally did it, which is why he ends up in third place here in a very formidable lineup. But I'm going to call this one square up. I can't really pick a winner. I wish I had better photos or video to actually go to, but again, so difficult to find anything to compare to. All right, this next shot is actually a very similar pose for both gentlemen, going for a little more for the aesthetics here. You can see how small and compact that Paul's waist is here. Nick, not as much, but very good muscle, better. You see how Nick's legs are in that pose? I would like to see him doing a front double bicep like that. I just think it looks better aesthetically, enhances his physique a little bit more, takes away from the fact he doesn't have the best proportions on the world, but neither did Paul DeMayo. But again, this one's almost a dead tie. I don't really know which guy I'm going to go with here. I'd probably give the nod to Nick Walker, just because he's got a lot thicker muscle. His upper body is much more developed than Paul DeMayo's. Leg-wise, you got to give it to Paul DeMayo. Nobody was beating him from below the waist. But I'm going to give the nod to Nick Walker on this one. Difficult, but somebody's got to win. Somebody's got to lose. All right, folks, on to second place. Here we go. What do we have? Derek Lunsford versus Flex Wheeler. Both runner-ups, one in the Olympia, one in the 91 Nationals. Flex regarded as one of the best physiques of all time. Some people think he had the best physique of all time, all things considered. Derek Lunsford, who again emerged last year at the Pittsburgh in a guest posing, he got an invite to the Olympia and certainly didn't disappoint with a very much deserved runner-up finish. Some people had him winning the show. Again, arguable and debatable for another episode, but all right, so what are we looking at here? Well, a very similar pose, one hand on the hip, the other hand out in front, the most muscular. And I got to give this one the Flex Wheeler right here. Love Derek Lunsford. He's as wide as a house, relatively small waist for his size, but you can see this is very reminiscent of the Arnold that we were talking about. Nick Walker versus Sampson, right? One guy shorter and squattier with a lot of muscle, the other guy a little bit taller and more aesthetic. Now, because I like Sampson in that aesthetic department better and thought he had a better physique, I like to be consistent. I think Flex in this photo that you're looking at right here, that's very difficult to beat, folks, for anybody. Small waist, big cap shoulders, round muscle bellies, even in 91. This is he hadn't even emerged as a pro yet. So you really got to give it to Flex in this shot. And with all due respect to Derek, great shot on him too, but man, I'm going with Flex on this one. Very difficult to beat. Next pose, most muscular. I wish we had a better shot of this because this doesn't really show Flex at the best angle. Again, we did sharpen it just to kind of get some better contrast. But again, not a bad pose. Derek, that's one of his favorites right there. Really showing the cap of his shoulders. Got the wideness. He's got that X frame, beautiful physique. This is why he was runner-up at the Olympia. But Flex is certainly holding his own here. We don't have a lot of pictures of these two guys to compare, but this one here, I think I'd give the edge to Derek Lunsford over Flex, although Flex had a formidable, most muscular pose. He wasn't the widest guy in the world, so some poses he looks phenomenal. Others he makes himself look a little narrow. Actually, that's a rare most muscular from Flex. You normally see him with his hands on his hips. So in comparison to these two guys, I got to give the slight edge to Derek Lunsford on this one. And from the back. Now, Derek's back is phenomenal. It's for this reason that a lot of people had him winning the Olympia. And a lot of people speculated he would win the Arnold, but he didn't end up going in. Again, dance for another day. But this is a great shot. Now, again, there was no emphasis on lines in your butt and how to hold your legs back then. Flex, again, in that straightforward pose, All of us did that back then. That's just the way it was performed. We didn't kick out the legs to kind of show the sweep of the legs, just the way it was. But you can see his back double by is very good here. This is a great pose in a very, very close competition between Flex Wheeler and Derek Lunsford. Who do I pick? Oh, man, this is tough. I think I got to give the edge to Derek on this one. It's close, but no cigar. Flex certainly well prepared here in his conditioning. But I got to give this one to Derek. That's his bread and butter shot, folks. I mean, if Derek ever does win an Olympia, it's going to be from that pose right there, because that pose beat everybody in the entire show. And I'm talking about not just the Open, but any other division you could possibly think of. So, unfortunately, we only got 3 shots to choose from, but with those 3 shots, slight edge to Derek Lunsford. All due respect to Flex Wheeler, who would become one of the best bodybuilders of all time. So this is a great matchup, but Derek Lunsford winning this one out. All right, here we go. First place, 1991 Nationals versus the Olympia. And who do we have but Kevin Levrone, that nobody knew from anything. This guy came completely out of the blue. He won the Junior Nationals. He showed up here, and nobody knew who Kevin was, but everybody knew who he was after the show, because he would beat the much-favored Flex Wheeler to get this title, become a pro, and move on to the IFBB Pro League. But front abdominal shot, heads up with the champ himself, Olympia champ, Hadi Chupan. Again, even though Kevin's around 5'10", so, on the taller side, but Hadi is only about 5'5" or 5'6". So another case of 2 different physiques. Both gentlemen holding their own here. You can see the better shape and proportions on Kevin, clearly. Does he have the muscle to compete with Hadi? I think in this pose he does. Smaller waist, that's for sure. Legs full and a lot of muscle, a lot of separation. So does Hadi. Again, this pose right here, I'm going to consider pretty much heads up. This is a tie. Can't really pick a winner, again, at least from the photos that we have here. But Kevin's holding his own. We're going to go to the back lat spread. Now, this is probably a better shot, really, for Hadi, only because of, again, he's got a lot of muscle. You can see Kevin, as an amateur, needed a little bit of back work. His arms were huge, all right? And because his arms were huge, his back suffered a little bit. Much like Phil Heath, when he first came around as an amateur, he was all arms, needed to bring up the back. When he finally did it, boom, there's 7 Olympias to his credit. Although Kevin would never win an Olympia, I think he should have at least won 1. His back is what needed to come up. So I got to give Hadi Chupan the edge here in this back lat spread. You can see by the amount of muscle that he carries on those lats. I mean, that's a great shot for Hadi, and he was able to actually sit there and contend with Derek Lunsford, even though that was Derek's bread and butter shot at the Olympia. I don't think Hadi won it from behind, though. I think he actually won it from the other sides. But this is a great heads-up comparison with these 2 guys. Edge has got to go to Hadi Chupan, the champ. All right. Most muscular. I got to be honest, man, this isn't even close. Kevin Levrone by a country mile. That's one of Kevin's signature poses, and it would go on in his career and only get better as his shoulders, arms, and chest continue to get thicker. And this is, even in 91, at the national level, this is a pose that few people could keep up with. This is why he won the show, folks, okay? Again, this guy came from nowhere. Nobody ever heard of Kevin Levrone. He wasn't a favorite, wasn't a perennial top 5 guy. He had literally just got to the juniors, kicked ass, and then came right to the nationals. But in this pose, is not one of my favorite poses of Hadi. He doesn't have the arm size in that down position. His arms look fine when they're up in the air, front double by or other poses. But you can see here, his arms are a little bit overshadowed by the size of his shoulders. He's got a great chest. It's a great overall pose. But again, Kevin's arms are just killing him there. Side tricep, again, not the greatest picture we can find, but it's a side tricep. That's what we can get our hands on. You can see the difference in thickness here. You got to give this one to Hadi Chupan, the champ. I mean, that's just a great pose from the serratus to the lines in his legs. His arms look better from the side than they do from the front. Chest is full. Again, this is why he is your Olympia champion. Can't take that away from him. Kevin looks good here, but he does look like a little bit more like an amateur here, where he doesn't have the thickness that he would have later on in his career. But the waist is tiny. It's not really hitting the serratus right there yet. Again, always subject to whether a guy is actually in the pose or not. We do our best, but in the last pose, unfortunately, we didn't really have a back double bicep to compare, but this is very similar in nature. Kevin hitting that leg out like he used to. Later on in his career, he didn't hit it like that, but you could see the amount of muscle he's got in his back. I tell you what, I'd give this pose to Kevin right here because you can see the musculature from top to bottom. The separation was so much better back then. Hottie's got good separation, but the one critique he did get at the Olympia, even though he won, was that his from the back he wasn't as conditioned as Derek Lunsford. So, but he still had enough to get himself an Olympia title. But even though Kevin's not in the pose, if both these guys strike this pose, I don't know. I think Kevin's right there, man. Again, we're talking about the Nationals versus the Olympia, folks. And we're talking about 30 years, over 30 years of difference in time frame of bodybuilding. So that's your straight up comparisons, folks. Like I said, mano y mano. Who wins this one? I don't know if I can make that call right here. You got Kevin, you got Hottie. I don't know. Overall, I think the 91 lineup beats the current Olympia lineup. Now, that's going to probably catch a lot of heat. That's cool. I'm good with it. You guys can give me your opinion. I always welcome your opinion in the comments. Keep those comments coming, folks. But this is why we put this stuff out there, to inspire thought and to really test and see the history of bodybuilding. Does it hold up? We hear all these things all the time. They were way better back in the day. The lineups were much deeper. Well, I can tell you the lineup was deeper because you just saw the top five: Kevin, Flex, Paul, Ronnie, and Matt. That was followed by the next five, which was yours truly: Chris Cormier, Edgar Fletcher, Dean Caputo, and John Saya. That's your top 10 nationals. We were all amateurs, duking it out, trying to get a pro card back then. Now, there's no question that that's the toughest nationals of all time. Will never be eclipsed. Never going to see another one like it. But does it hold water up against the modern-day Olympians? That's what we're trying to find out with this episode of The Voice of Bodybuilding. Hope you guys enjoyed it. That's going to wrap it up. Get those comments in, folks. This is going to be a real good one. And let's see if you think the 91 Nationals beats the 2022 Olympia.